Welcome back to Hymn Workouts. What we are trying to do is to use classic hymns as scripts of devotion. And I want you to think about these hymns as kind of a HIIT workout for the soul. If you know anything about HIIT workouts, the idea is that in less time you can get more out of a workout. And there's something true with these hymns. If you're willing to engage your mind, really focus your attention, use your imagination, that by taking 10 or 15 minutes to think about a hymn, you can benefit more from that activity than sitting down and mindlessly reading a book for an hour at a time. Now, before we get into this hymn, I just want to raise a problem. And the problem is that we're all selective atheists. The proverb says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." And when that's said in Proverbs, the picture is not really of an all-out atheist, somebody who doesn't believe in God at all. The picture, rather, is that when we sin, we like to pretend that we don't believe in God. And we all do that. Because we're unaware, or because we joyfully forget God's presence, these are the moments that we actually are most prone to temptation or despair. And so think for yourself, what would happen if you really believed that God was present all of the time in your life? How would that change your attitude in the midst of temptation? Would you be more vigilant? How, when facing affliction, would you have more confidence and comfort? So much of our problems, or so many of our problems as Christians, come from the fact that we forget who God is and that He's with us. And so this is a hymn that's really focused on the omnipresence of God, the fact that He's everywhere, that we can't escape Him, that can be a source of great joy and comfort, though, for the Christian. And so this is a hymn, it's based off Psalm 139, but it's taking this truth that God is everywhere, it's applying it into our lives. Let me read the first stanza. "In all my vast concerns with Thee, in vain my soul would try to shun Thy presence, Lord, or flee the notice of Thine eye." A couple of strong words, shun and flee. Think about communities like the Amish that will shun somebody, that they actually they see and then they turn their face and ignore that person as if they don't exist. Isn't it a sad thought that we would do the same to God, that we would shun His presence, or like Jonah, actually seek to flee the notice of His eye? But we do that. I know you do that. I do that. Now, what's the effect? Let's keep reading. "Thy all-surrounding sight surveys my rising and my rest, my public walks, my private ways, the secrets of my breast." It's a pretty foolish thing to try to shun God or flee from His presence, because we just can't do it. We've got to recognize is that He sees everything. And there's a kind of alertness that should come to our heart when we recognize that just as if there was a camera that every moment was broadcasting not just our life but our thoughts, putting it out there in public. Imagine if on Facebook or on Instagram or on YouTube at any moment of any day, your friends and family could go to that channel and they could watch everything going on inside your heart. How would you feel? How would that change the kind of thoughts that you're willing to indulge in? That's what this hymn is reminding us of. Our public walks, our private ways, the secrets of our breast, all of these things are seen by God. "My thoughts lie open to the Lord before they're formed within. And ere my lips pronounce the word, He knows the sense I mean. O wondrous knowledge deep and high, where can a creature hide? Within Thy circling arms I lie, beset on every side." Now, right at the tipping point where you're thinking, this is just a scary reality, there's a shift in the hymn. And the shift reminds us that actually it's a wonderful thing that God has this intimate knowledge of us. I mean, just think for a moment, when you are your heart is filled with passion, whether it's grief and sorrow, if it's just joy, but sometimes there's these emotions, they're bottled up and we wish that we could express them, but we lack the vocabulary. We don't know how to communicate what's in our heart. Part of the wonder of God's knowledge is that our thoughts lie open to Him, even before they're formed. Even before we pronounce the word, He knows what we mean. And think of the comfort when you come into prayer that God has that kind of knowledge of us. The hymn writer says, "So let Thy grace surround me still, and like a bulwark prove, to guard my soul from every ill, secured by sovereign love." One of the great benefits of meditating on hymns is paying attention to just select words. Those two words, sovereign love, are two words that you should actually pause and just think about. Love, in and of itself, if it's impotent, is of no use. If someone, cares about you, desires your good, is committed to you, but if they lack any power to help you, it might be a nice thought, but it's not of any practical use. But when you take sovereignty, when you take power and authority and attach it to love, that's a love that can help us in any given circumstances. And what the hymn reminds us is that this knowledge that God has is combined with a sovereign love. And you put all of this together, and that's why God is like a bulwark that protects and secures the soul from every ill. Now, there's another little tipping point in this hymn. What the hymn does is it takes this awareness of God's presence and it applies it to the humble heart and shows the comfort that it provides. But not every heart is humble. Not every heart is contrite. And so the knowledge of omniscience and of omnipresence, which for the believer is a source of comfort, to the person who's willfully engaging in evil, it should be a source of fear. Let me read you the next stanzas. Lord, where shall guilty souls retire, forgotten and unknown? In hell they meet thy dreadful fire, in heaven thy glorious throne. Should I suppress the vital breath to escape the wrath divine, thy voice would break the bars of death and make the grave resign. The picture is the guilty soul, the soul that is indulging in evil, thinking that God cannot see. That soul cannot hide in hell. It cannot hide by taking its own life. Doesn't matter which corner of this universe or whatever else exists, God is everywhere and can see all. Which is why the way this ends is with some really important practical advice. If over my sin I think to draw the curtains of the night, those flaming eyes that guard thy law would turn the shades to night. We cannot hide anything behind curtains, which is why all of us should step from darkness into light and live transparently before God. Final stanza. The beams of noon, the midnight hour, are both alike to thee. O may I ne'er provoke that power from which I cannot flee. O may I never provoke that power from which I cannot flee. There are two types of people that this hymn speaks to. The person who has a humble and contrite spirit should recognize that God is all present, draw great comfort and peace from knowing his love, that sovereign love that was spoken of. But for the person who's fleeing from God or shunning God or thinking they can pull a curtain and hide behind it, their actions from God, that person needs to recognize the fearful truth that God sees everything, that he is just. And they need to prayerfully seek that God would take them to the place where they recognize and have a heart that would never provoke the power from which they cannot flee. There's mercy for us in Jesus. But the one who sets himself from God or sets himself against God cannot stay hidden, but one day will face the justice of God. That's part of what this hymn reminds us of, and it's something worth meditating on.